I'm an absolutely completely product of Finland, and I'm very, very grateful for countless things that I was able to experience. I grew up on a farm. My parents did not even go to high school. They worked in a factory, and I was the manual labor. And you asked, what's the hardest thing I've done?
Where you think that Finland beats the US in?
From an entrepreneurial perspective, or in an entrepreneurial context, two things that I think Finland could do better. I'll take two examples of where Finland is internationally known and phenomenal, especially relative to the size of the country.
If you're looking at a young Finnish potential entrepreneur, would you recommend going to Silicon Valley? Do you see any merits in staying in Finland?
Anyone and everyone who has an inkling of starting a company, of becoming an entrepreneur, the number one thing, the hardest thing where most people fail is
Hello, and welcome to Joy of Finland, the podcast that highlights Finland's strengths and areas of improvement. I'm your host, Matt, and I'd like to introduce our guest, Sami Inkinen. Sami's originally from Finland, and he's been based in the US for many years now. He's co-founded two billion-dollar companies, the first being Trulia, an online real estate marketplace, and the second being Virta Health, of which he's currently the CEO. Virta's a leader in type 2 diabetes reversal, and it's also a creator of a new standard in medical care for people living with type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, or obesity. Aside from that, Sami's quite the athletic marvel, having rode from California to Hawaii alongside his wife to raise awareness for the dangers of sugar, and breaking a world record all the while. As well, he's a triathlon world champion for his age group. So, Sami, I thought we could get started with you sharing a little bit more about your story in your own words.
well, first of all, thank you for the overly kind introduction, Matt, and excited to be here. In terms of my background briefly, born and raised in Finland, obviously, grew up in a small place called Ruokolahti, on a farm. My parents were kind of middle class factory workers, so I had very positively humble beginnings. Lots of manual labor, picking potatoes, feeding chickens. So that was kind of my environment growing up. But luckily, I got into computers very early. So I got a Commodore 64 before I turned 10 years of age, and so that kind of opened my eyes into, wait a second, there's a lot more what's coming than just potato fields and feeding chickens, but this digital world and computers might enable me to do, and people in general to do amazing things. So I get very excited about computers, and by the time I was a teenager, I was running a BBS, or bulletin board system, sort of pre-internet, from my room at my parents' house. So I'd say that's kind of the foundation. Grew up on a farm, but got into computers early in my age, and then moved to Helsinki later to study physics at the Aalto University, or Helsinki University of Technology, and so maybe that's a little bit about foundation, and then I'll just briefly mention how I got to America. I started a software company in Finland, but to me, Silicon Valley was like the NHL for hockey players, or Hollywood for actors and actresses. So I always wanted to come to Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, and try to build something there. So 2003, which crazy, more than 20 years ago now, I came to Silicon Valley by way of Stanford Business School, and I've been here in America ever since for more than 20 years, and co-founded two companies so far.
Yes, thank you very much for that context. I thought we could get started diving a little bit more about Virta Health. And I can't think of anyone else better to ask about type 2 diabetes and obesity. And I think you mentioned that there's an epidemic in the world and something that's affecting Finland as well. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, my company Virta Health is a healthcare technology company on a mission to reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people. But it might be helpful to a little bit talk about metabolic health and diabetes and obesity as a problem. And first, I should say, you mentioned in the introduction that I was and I'm still an endurance athlete and won world championships in triathlon in my age group. So if you had asked me, let's say 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, how to solve type 2 diabetes and obesity, I would have said impossible. There is no way to solve this disease that clearly is a lifestyle problem. If you eat too many cookies and donuts, like, blame yourself. Like, there's no way to solve this. There's no way to solve this massive problem, which, now globally there's more than 1 billion people who have type 2 diabetes or obesity, and 500 million people who have type 2 diabetes. So it's a huge problem. And for me personally, and how I ended up studying Virta, what kind of everything changed was I actually discovered that I was on my way to type 2 diabetes myself, and I was already pre-diabetic. So contrary to what I thought, oh, this is a personal choice, you just eat too much, I discovered through the scientists that I met that type 2 diabetes and obesity is actually a metabolic disease. It is not a personal choice. It is not a lack of willpower. So that was kind of number one thing. And it's still a misconception because people think, yeah, if you have metabolic disease, like, blame yourself. That is not true. And then a second thing that is still not very well understood that I discovered and led me to found Virta is that you can actually nutritionally reverse these conditions, type 2 diabetes and obesity. You can reverse them if you can use nutrition to eliminate hunger and cravings. Because if you don't eliminate hunger and cravings, you're going to be using your willpower, and that's why all diets have failed. So it is possible to manipulate nutrition to reverse these conditions. So anyways, long story short, 2014, I teamed up with a group of scientists and we started Virta Health with this crazy mission, reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people. And, now we've helped more than 100,000 people and published results and shown that, yes, it's possible to reverse type 2 diabetes, eliminate the need for insulin. People lose tens of kilos of body fat in the process effortlessly, and it truly works. So that's the mission that I'm on right now.
That's a very inspiring mission, and looking forward to see what you're able to achieve in the future. And at least it's just so surprising to me that someone as fit as you could be pre-diabetic, and maybe that comes as a surprise to a lot of people. And I guess the next question I could ask is, it's definitely seems like you've done a lot of hard things, and something that I looked at was for your expedition to from California to Hawaii. Your mantra was use Sisu, not sugar. So I thought you could define Sisu for our non-Finnish audience and describe when have you had to use the most Sisu in your life? Meaning, what's the hardest thing you've done?
Wow, what a question. Well, first of all, the adventure I think that you're referencing is this row across the Pacific Ocean that me and my wife did in the summer of 2014. So we rowed unsupported in a rowboat from California to Hawaii across, I guess it's like 4,000 kilometers or something like that. And it took 45 days and 3 hours, but who's counting? But you asked, so Sisu, and obviously it relates to that adventure as well. What does Sisu mean? Well, in English, I would say it is perseverance and grit. It is grit and the ability to not give up when going gets very tough. And fun enough, there's even a Wikipedia page for Sisu, Sisu. So that's how I describe it into my non-Finnish friends. It is perseverance and grit that Finnish people exhibit, and they don't give up even in in the face of the worst possible adversity. Um, and you asked like, what's the hardest thing I've done? I hope the hardest thing is still to come. I always like to think it's still day one in life. It's still day one in building a company, or just generally thinking about. I'm always thinking about the future, but looking back, there are many moments where Sisu has been needed badly. One, obviously, the Pacific row. There was nothing easy. Rowing across the Pacific is not dolphins and rainbows. It's very cold and stormy and rainy. So that would be one. Becoming a parent, and I have two wonderful little girls, 6 and 8 year olds. It takes sometimes Sisu to parent with compassion. So that takes sometimes Sisu. And then, honestly, the untold story of successful startups and companies is that the more successful you are, the harder it is behind the scenes to get there. And so I would have countless stories about navigating, say, global financial crisis 2008, 2009 with Trulia within the real estate ecosystem when the entire world's falling apart, particularly the residential real estate industry in the US. Entering COVID with Virta Health when suddenly, everybody knows what happened. You have to work remotely, and your clients are suffering, and your team members are suffering, and everything's hard. So, plenty examples where Sisu was needed.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. So thank you for that definition as well. And I thought we could then shift gears to the focus of the podcast, which is on Finland. So maybe we could get started with what you think some strengths of Finland are.
Strengths of Finland. Well, I'm an absolutely completely product of Finland, and so not to promote myself, but I'm very very grateful for countless things that I was able to experience. And if I just start from the basics, I would say the free education and healthcare, just phenomenal ground to cultivate and enable the human talent to flourish. Because it doesn't matter what your parents have or did not have, the system takes care of your health. And if you have the desire and capabilities to whatever, like I ended up doing masters in physics and started my career in a nuclear power plant, yet I grew up on a farm. My parents did not even go to high school. They worked in a factory, and I was their manual labor. Obviously, it was a wonderful childhood, but so that's an example of, I would say, one thing is free education, free healthcare, and the system allows you to kind of make most out of your life. So I would say that's one thing that's wonderful about Finland. The second one is, I think this is the infrastructure and sort of safety. So phenomenal infrastructure, whether that's roads, transports, broadband, and so forth. So however you want to, let's say, innovate as an entrepreneur, there's an amazing infrastructure that allows you to do more or less anything. You can tap amazing talent. You can tap amazing resources from investors or whatnot, and so there's an amazing infrastructure to do things professionally, or start a company or whatever you want to do. So I'd say that's a second. And then I think the third thing, which may be less appreciated, but I've certainly noticed it now having lived many years outside of Finland, is I think our brand and reputation as a nation and as people who come from Finland is trustworthy, reliable in that what we say we do, we will do, and then maybe some level of sort of quality, Scandinavian design, Nokia, so Linux came, the operating system, MySQL. So I think we have a pretty good reputation globally, and a pretty good brand as Finland and Finnish people. I hope so.
Yeah, I would say maybe I'm just ignorant, but I didn't know much about Finland before I ended up here. And that's part of what this podcast is about, is to get that brand even more out there because, like you said, there's so many strengths that stem from it. And then I guess one helpful perspective or insight you have is having spent so much time in the US. So, is there anything that you could share about specifically where you think, aside from what you've already described, that Finland beats the US
Hockey.
in?
Where does Finland beat the US? I mean, every place, every country has its sort of strengths and weaknesses and differences. So, I like to cherish the differences and pick the best of both worlds, rather than think about like where is one country so much better. But um, what does Finland beat? Obviously, I mentioned the things already. Like we have an amazing foundation that cultivates and lets human talent to flourish. Free education, free healthcare, high quality education, good infrastructure, good safety, and so forth. So I already mentioned those. Um, Actually, I'm gonna twist your question, and I'm gonna say what Finland could do better. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So many amazing things in Finland, and I already mentioned that. But I'd say from let's say from an entrepreneurial perspective, or in an entrepreneurial context, two things that I think Finland could do better. I think one is I think we still need more a culture of taking risk and entrepreneurship, which is one of the reasons I love having conversations like this and trying to be an example for others. So I think we need more celebrating founders and entrepreneurs who take a risk, try to build something useful for the world, try to create jobs, try to create value for the country in Finland. So I'd say that's one. We don't have that kind of a culture, which, for example, the United States has. So that would be one thing that I think Finland can do better. And then the second one is just from a capabilities perspective. We have great R&D, great scientists, great computer scientists, great design. But it's also like a stereotypical thing. I would say we as Finns, we should focus more on commercialization and distribution and go to market and call it sales. I think we're still lacking that. And even in tech context, the best product does not always win. The best product does not always win. And I think we have a little bit too much of that kind of thinking in Finland. Well, we're going to build the best thing and then everything else is going to take care of itself. It doesn't. Distribution is still king as well with a great product and service.
Thank you for that. Uh, Twisting the question, I think we were anyways going in that direction. So what I could maybe ask is how do you see Finland improving in that attitudes about entrepreneurship and celebrating things? Do you think there's anything just Finland can tangibly do? I guess I could plug Slush where I work. I think that's one thing that helps with it, but do you have any other ideas of what could be done?
So let's take it. I'll take two examples of where Finland is like internationally known and phenomenal, especially relative to the size of the country. One is auto sports, Formula One. Formula One. Like, how is it possible from a country of 5.5 million people? Like, we have among the 20 or so top Formula One drivers, one or two constantly are Finns for the last, I don't know, 30 years. Valtteri Bottas there, for example. We've had Kimi Räikkönen. We've just had Formula One drivers. I think it is example, the power of example. These guys, in this case, not girls, have been very successful. And then all the juniors, there's a massive pyramid of foundation of juniors who want to be the next, I don't know, Valtteri Bottas or Kimi Räikkönen, for example. So that's one example. The second example is hockey. Like, yeah, it is a winter sport, but still, from a country of 5.5 million people, like there are so many NHL players from Finland and a massive base of juniors playing hockey and excited, and they want to go and get to play in NHL. I think we need exactly the same type of excitement among founders and entrepreneurs. And Slush is a perfect example of that. And hopefully, with my tiny little personal example, can also encourage more and more people to say, hey, I'm well educated. I got this amazing foundation of education in Finland. what can I do in my 20, 30, 40, 50-year professional career? Maybe I can go and start something. Maybe I can go and build something. So I'm a huge believer in that kind of power of example, and then creates a huge base of um, younger, the next generation of people who want to go and do remarkable things. So I think we can take a page from the hockey or the Formula One book in building companies and startups and growth companies.
And in the topic of entrepreneurship, maybe actually the last question I could ask you, and this maybe relates to a discussion I had in my previous podcast episode with Yuri Engström, who's been to Silicon Valley and advocated a lot about the benefits of going to Silicon Valley. And of course, you've done the same, and it sounds like you've reaped a lot from there. So if you're looking at someone young, a young Finnish potential entrepreneur, do you think that would you recommend going to Silicon Valley? Do you see any merits in staying in Finland and trying to build a company?
Well, yes and yes. Um, so you can be phenomenally successful and impactful in Finland, starting a company, a scaling company in Finland. Absolutely. Like, absolutely you can. So you don't have to. But let me take an example from kind of other category. You can be a very successful actor or actress in Finland. You can also be a very successful hockey player in Finland. Same as with entrepreneurship. But I would say if you have the desire, if you have the excitement, it can be very helpful to go to US or go to Silicon Valley. Again, the same. If you're an actor or actress, going to Hollywood, you'll probably learn amazing things. You probably have bigger platform, new opportunities, bigger opportunities. Same with hockey. So I always encourage everyone to kind of go international and learn new things, get to know new people, um, build a network. So it's definitely helpful. So yes and yes, you can be successful anywhere. Finland is an amazing place to start a company, but if you have that kind of a burn inside of you, the desire to kind of see how you might make it or not. Hopefully, you'll make it in a place like Silicon Valley. You should absolutely go there. It can only help, and you can always go back to Finland. I, for a number of reasons, ended up staying in the States. One reason is I'm married here and life is here. But yeah, I encourage people to go and try. And there's other places too. And the world is very global. Talent, information, market, everything is global. So I think getting experience outside of Finland can only help.
For sure. I think it's interesting that since I'm from North America, I've had the kind of reverse relationship, not exactly coming from Silicon Valley, but uh I've grown up a lot moving around, so I've seen the value of going internationally and trying new things. And Finland has ended up being somewhere I've enjoyed a lot and been my favorite country. But that's actually all the questions I had. I think we covered a nice balance of strengths and areas of improvement for Finland. So, any final thoughts you want to leave with the audience, Sami?
Well, I'll say two things. One, keep crushing it with Slush. Slush is already a global brand. It's just phenomenal work you all have done over the last, I think, decade. So Slush is just amazing, almost like a beacon of hope of entrepreneurship in the Finland. So that's just absolutely fantastic. And then the second thing I will say, I just want to encourage anyone and everyone who has an inkling of starting a company, of becoming an entrepreneur. The number one thing, the hardest thing where most people fail is taking the first step. Just taking the first step. Just go and give it a shot.
Very wise, I think, to end the episode. So, thanks again very much, Sami.
Yeah, thanks for having me.